Well, we got involved in the Tate Exchange workshop when we were invited to I suppose, propose something for the Theatres of Exchange series of events curated by Holloway at Tate Modern in February 2017. And both Ruth and I work on the avant-garde. We've also collaborated before on various interdisciplinary courses that we teach in the school. And so under the umbrella of the idea of exchange, we brought together different types of publics and communities, and did some quite fun creative activities. And but both of our workshops came from, they were kind of end of projects workshops that sort of worked very well together on the day, but at the same time also had a meaning in the, on their own, and were part of a kind of continuum of activities that we have both done over a number of months. With schools and other communities.
So my part in the workshop was to work with a musician and a visual artist, and the idea was that we would all kind of produce different aspects of Dada, which was interdisciplinary after all, and to create new work, not only to kind of reflect historically on what had happened in Dada 100 years ago, but to create new work that was kind of triggered by creative women 100 years ago. So we had some original new music, which my colleague Sonia Alori performed on the day, some composition, some recorded, some performed live, and we also had digital animation that we had up on the screen that Via Paziana had made. So we didn't want it to be only historical, and we also had students involved, postgraduate and undergraduate students from Royal Holloway, as well as some kind of outreach organisations, community organisations, some of whom had never been to the Tate Modern before, who then made their own creative responses. And I think that was one of the really exciting parts of the workshop, in that they made chance poetry, where they cut up words, put them in a bag, pulled them out and made their own kind of collage poems, and our participants read them at the end, and where they made visual collages as well. And the really exciting part actually was seeing people being creative when maybe they hadn't done anything creative for some time, and that was kind of stretching the boundaries of what we usually do in the classroom, I think certainly for both of us, if not for our colleagues. And your school students as well were creating new work, weren't they?
Absolutely. I worked with them previously, sort of giving them some idea, some material to prepare and to think about in terms of studying Italian Futurism. And what was very interesting is that we brought together students mainly from sixth formers and some of our own undergraduate students, but they were all working, coming from different disciplinary backgrounds. So we had historians, we had art historians, we had students of design, and then some of our own modern linguists. And what was very interesting is that we tried to give them the sense that they were all looking at an extremely exciting but very interdisciplinary movement, and generally speaking we tend to look at these movements from within the boundaries of our own discipline, whatever that discipline is. And what the workshop did is put people in dialogue with one another. So the historians would see an artwork by the futurists and have a particular type of interpretation and angle to look at it, but then the students of design would look at it in a different way, and the art historians again would look at it in a different way. And so whilst we started off in a way that was slightly more not historical but let's say more descriptive, what do we understand about futurism, then again in the creative part of the workshop, it was very interesting because we had I gave them something that none of them had looked at before, which was some examples of futurist poetry, and then I said, well, now you create your own futurist poems, and the results are really rather extraordinary, because you could see that by doing something more playful, and I think playfulness actually pedagogically is also really important and very interesting. We tend to kind of overlook it as soon as we go beyond sort of early years education and perhaps, you know, primary school education, but there is an element of kind of playfulness that really is very important in terms of creativity. And you could actually assess how well the students had understood issues about futurist ideology, some of the kind of ideas about sort of media boundaries, and they had absorbed really well the vocabulary that the futurists were using, but they were not doing futurist works, copying futurist works. They were doing their own interpretation of the idea of the city and the excitement of the city that you find in futurism. So we had lots of beautiful words in freedom experiments with lots of different fonts and different uses of colour, which was simply a kind of futurist interpretation of the City of London or of the students' trip to Tate Modern. So it was a really interesting way to actually assess how deeply they understood some of the the concepts they had absorbed before in class, and they had a chance to present on them at Tate. And I think the space worked really well, didn't it?
That was the real revelation for me, actually, to see the students in that space, the school students and our own undergraduate and postgraduate students and general public. I mean, we had children there.
Absolutely.
We had people from community groups, as I say, who hadn't accessed the space before, and everybody was working around tables, and the place was in a mess. It was quite nice, because there was bits of paper on the floor and colouring pens, and it was it was a bit that I was sceptical about. Will people participate? And they really did. Yes, and a lot of the feedback was then, I haven't done anything creative since I was at primary school, or I didn't think I could make anything anymore. And we had work displayed on boards, and we were saying, your work's displayed at the Tate Modern. It was so exciting for the students and all the participants to be actually creating something. And I think, as you say, they understood better. You can talk to them about the theory behind creating a poem and chants and using juxtaposition and so on. But for them to actually do it, a lot of the feedback that we got from students was, I surprised myself at how much I enjoyed it and how creative I could be, and how it helped me to understand. And some of our postgraduate students, and indeed the school teachers that came, said it would inform the way that they work. And I think that's what we've taken out of it, thinking of, as you say, being playful in the classroom, being creative, more interactive, and less didactic. And that was it was definitely a new experience for me as well.
I think there was also an element of, I go back to the idea of interdisciplinarity, so working across disciplines but also across media. And I sometimes sort of get a bit frustrated by the fact that as soon as you move into secondary education and certainly higher education, then this is the world of logos over techne. So everything has to do with the words that we use to describe processes and things, and and everything is channeled in that way. And the world of techne, in the kind of ancient Greek sort of way, which was actually the art of making something, so the more creative part of the process, it's really relegated to students of design or sort of art colleges, and somehow there's a complete disconnect, which seems to me really bizarre when you are particularly sort of studying movements that were very creative, that wanted to kind of destroy the boundaries between disciplines, but also the way in which these disciplines were constructed and were policed, and taught, and all of this has I think there's a kind of higher level of really sort of trying to engage with the creative process in a way that actually could also have a creative response. And that's certainly something I think we do very, very little at university. And perhaps it's something that, maybe this is the beginning of some sort of change, or at least, a kind of dialogue with other, educators and practitioners about what it is that we do and how we assess, and whether, some element of kind of creative work could come back into university curriculum. Certainly the work that you did with other practitioners and creating new work and kind of co-production of knowledge seemed to be incredibly powerful and very interesting.
Yeah, and I think trying to make it relevant, so not only historical, of course the historical aspects, we're all fascinated by it, but also allowing the participants to base things on their own experience. It can become very much more real to them, and not just sort of lecturing on something which, whilst I think it's exciting that it's the centenary of Dada, can feel very remote to young people and to children, but for them to be thinking, actually cutting and pasting or reacting to newspaper articles and making them my own and focusing on the words, that the process has a relevance, and I think by doing it themselves they could see that more clearly.
You also left some work at Tate that was there throughout the week, you know, how to do your own sort of Dada poem, and I don't know if you want to say something about that.
We were encouraged to leave activities so that the public could drop by and have a go at it, and again it seemed to appeal to children in particular, but and then maybe to the childlike in the adult, where people could make their own artworks. We had lots of visuals that they could, you know, bounce off and use, again, that had been prepared especially for the event, so that it could kind of continue beyond the, you know, the actual day of the workshop, and that work was, you know, displayed on the boards. Yeah. I would say be brave. I was slightly reluctant to lose control. I think as teachers, we're used to kind of wanting to be very structured about what's going on in the classroom, and, you know, imparting the knowledge. We kind of know what's going to come back to a certain degree, although we always, you know, get unexpected dialogues going. But to sort of allow things to happen a bit more freely, it's incredible what can be produced. You know, I thought, will people want to participate? Will they be a bit shy? And then to see people standing up at the end and reading their work and showing their work, it sort of made me think that you can be a bit more flexible about what's going to be produced, and that if you leave some gaps sometimes, just like when you're asking for feedback from students in class, if you leave those gaps a little bit longer, you know, it's interesting to see what can be produced. That was the part that really pushed me, that I hadn't incorporated into my work before, this kind of creative aspect. That if you just let go a little bit, you know, there was mess everywhere, and you weren't quite sure what the timings were going to be, and to leave some things, to leave them to chance, which is entirely in the spirit of the avant-garde, allows things to happen. Actually.
Yes, I think with absolutely with the creative side. I mean, and actually be bold and brave. But I mean, the creative elements can be incredibly powerful. So certainly that's something that I'd say to people, sort of think about that. If in particular you're interested in working with schools, I mean, certainly my experience has been very, very rewarding, and but it has also been very well thought out, in the sense that I have found a very clear hook onto the school curriculum, both for students that do modern history and for students that study art history, that, you know, will both study the Futurist movement in one way or another for very different reasons and in very different ways. And so working with schools to say, well, this is something that could be a kind of enrichment program that also has clear links with my research and my interest in pushing the kind of disciplinary boundaries and putting disciplines that normally don't work together to put them in dialogue with one another, has been very interesting. So there's been quite a lot of input, very positive input, you know, in terms of me creating new resources that I've tried out in schools, that are resources that are fairly similar to the ones that I use at university level. So for me, it's also been a way to perhaps take away that artificial boundary that I had put there myself, that students in the sixth form are very different from our own university students, and then you realise that they're not really. And that perhaps actually as university educators it is also up to us to break down some of these barriers, you know, whether they're real or perceived, and work more with schools, because actually the partnership can be very, very inspiring and very fruitful for our own students as well. And perhaps that's one of the things that I'm quite keen to develop more in the future, to have our own students that study the avant-garde, and Ruth and I have been teaching a course together for a number of years, see how our own students, for instance, could, in terms of their own perhaps development and experiences with different audiences, could also go into schools and do some workshops there. But that's perhaps phase 2 or 3 of
some of the feedback though from the postgraduates in particular was about ways of teaching differently, making them think there was ways of learning and teaching differently, and that was quite inspiring to see. And as you say, working with teachers, obviously the participants learning, but I had a great deal to find out from working with sort of creative practitioners, so Sonia, who is a music therapist, and Vaya, who works as an artist with community groups, and then with school teachers, and us as university teachers. We have so much more in common than what separates us, and for us, for professional practice, I think it was a very interesting experience as well.